Now, there is um, other documentation that shows that officials of the Archdiocese and a decision had been made to actually interview the child who was the subject of the complaint and the abuse by Waymire and the mother, and they had been asked to come to the Archdiocese and give a recorded statement, which they did before this meeting that you described. Before I told you that today, or represented that today to you today, did you know that?
I did not.
Did you know when you went to the Blessed Sacrament that pornography had been utilized and marijuana had been supplied to the child and the trailer had been used for both?
I did not.
Did you make any effort to turn the computer that had been taken by you or the gun over to law enforcement?
I did not know.
Why not bring it to police?
I was bringing it to the Archdiocese and people who were in communication directly with the police, and certainly my expectation was that it would be both items would be delivered as soon as possible to the police.
Now, you had been dealing with problems concerning Waymire for some time, had you not, before this report was made to you?
I had dealt with Curtis Waymire on a couple of occasions, yes. I also was supervising the monitor who was working with him.
When you're on your way there and you believe this call was made to a police officer whose name you don't know, and you're thus permitted to continue to proceed, did Bomistek tell the police officer a report had already been made?
I believe he did.
How long was the conversation with Bomistek and the police officer while you were in the car with him?
I can see where it happened, and so it was right out the window here on I-94 eastbound. Took the time going from the I-35E Commons here up until we were by 61.
What did Bomistek tell the police you and he were going to do?
I don't recall that specifically.
Did you and Deacon Bomistek get permission from the police to take the gun and the computer and
No.
tell them you're intending to seize them?
No.
Did Bomistek tell the police a report had already been made to? Tell you that a report had already been made to law enforcement?
I don't think he knew that until the meeting. He was called in at the end of the meeting at Father Laird's office that morning. And so I believe Vomastek learned in that context of a report already having been made.
I'll get it right eventually.
Hardly anyone does.
So, to this day, do you know who made the report?
I do not.
Now, your history with Waymire went back to many years where some problems had arisen, correct?
I wouldn't characterize it many years, but I believe it went back to about 2004.
In 2004, you got a report about Waymire and 19 to 20-year-olds, him trying to cruise them and have a party with them. It caused enough concern.
Yeah, I think there's some details there that are confused. Let me tell you, what I received was a phone call, I don't recall from whom, saying that two young men around 20 years old had been in, I believe, the Barnes & Noble in Harmar, that stands out for me because I shop there from time to time, and that it was, I believe, a Sunday evening, and that Waymire had spoken to each of them separately when they were friends. They'd gone there, but they were separate from one another. When they put their heads together after the conversation, they both found it weird.
You made some record of that in any case.
I believe I did, yeah.
And as a result of the information you received, a decision was made to send him to St. Luke's, wasn't it?
I don't recall the timing because there's several interactions, but somewhere along that point, we did send him for assessment for certain.
Then before Waymire was sent to St. Luke's, what were all the concerns that caused him to be sent there that you were aware of?
From my point of view, it was this particular incident, and it struck me as so this is my own opinion, I can't speak to what the others in the Archdiocese may or may not have thought, but it was my belief that this fellow was dealing with homosexual adult attractions, and that he was not doing so with the kind of acknowledged integrity that's good for a person who's going to live as a celibate.
And in sending him to St. Luke's, you were the one that was basically handling this under the authority of the Archbishop?
I believe that's true, yes.
And before you sent him to St. Luke's then, based on the history that you just described, did you go back and look at the actual file that had been made?
I don't recall.
Did you interview Waymire and ask him specifically, are there any kids involved in your history here? And what is your sexual history involving children?
I did not.
Why not? Isn't that something you would want to know?
Well, Mr. Anderson, I think, I was dealing with a man I thought to be an adult gay male, and unless you're representing to me that people who are gay constitute a threat to kids, that was certainly not my thinking.
Well, you know I would never make that representation to you, and you know that, but you also know that you have behavior suspicious enough of sexual misconduct with teenager age young men, 19 or 20, as described at least, that is enough concern for the safety of others, correct?
I have to say I did not think that this rose to the level of a concern for the safety of others, and I don't mean that I was unmindful of the safety of others, but what was quite apparent to me was this was a man with some form of internal conflict. So I did not view this as fundamentally a misconduct issue, but as an adjustment issue.
You didn't bother to go back and look at what was reflected in the file about his history prior to that date, though, did you?
I think what I've testified is that I don't recall whether I did or not.
You did know that the Archdiocese and you, as the implementer, had a practice of sending priests who had offended children to St. Luke's for assessment and treatment recommendations, correct?
That's true.
How many had you been involved in or aware of that had been sent to that as a point in time to St. Luke's?
So you're conflating a couple of things here. We used St. Luke's for a variety of psychological
for child
assessments.
sexual abuse.
For child sexual
Your
abuse.
best estimate.
Right. And let me just underline clearly that I was not sending Waymire because I had any fear whatsoever about child sexual misconduct.
You
I
told
feel
us that,
badly
but
about
I'm talking about prior to sending Waymire there in 2004, how many would you estimate had been sent for suspicions of child sexual abuse?
I believe it would be a number less than 5, but I don't know.
And the Archdiocese required that they be given access to his information compiled by St. Luke's?
Actually, no.
Okay. When he was sent to St. Luke's, the Archdiocese paid for that?
That's correct.
And St. Luke's sent the bills back for whatever services they provided?
I presume so. I would not have been involved directly in that. I don't. Oh no, I probably did sign off on the bills. So if they were paid, almost certainly I approved them at some point.
Did you get a written report from St. Luke's concerning their findings?
I must surely have done so. I don't recall it.
And had St. Luke's been involved in aftercare concerning a number of other offenders that have been sent there before?
I can't speak specifically about it. So aftercare is one service provided by St. Luke's. Assessment another, treatment a third. They were involved in all of those with some of our priests. How many of them, you asked specifically about aftercare, and how many cases they're involved in aftercare with a priest accused of sexual misconduct with a child, I can't speak to that. I don't remember.
In the case of Waymire, you asked St. Luke's, to provide a limited amount of information to you concerning him and address a very narrow set of questions, did you not?
I don't think that's probably an unfair characterization.
Why did you limit the inquiry? Why didn't you want to know more?
Well, what I may have wanted to know is one thing. By this time, there was a great deal of canonical concern expressed about the misuse by church officials of treatment records for clergy. And I was concerned both about the protection of the rights of every priest and also frankly concerned that the more treatment is viewed as self-incriminating, the less likely it is to be useful.
After he was returned from St. Luke's, he was placed on restrictions so that he was allowed to continue in ministry but not to have contact with youth, correct?
I don't recall the specific restrictions.
In 2004, do you recall having a meeting with the principal at St. Joseph's, Jane Nordin, Nordin, about lifting the restrictions involving those imposed on him with youth?
I don't recall that, no.
Do you recall that the restrictions were lifted,
I don't recall that.
at least as to youth?
Again, I don't recall.
Do you recall that he was placed on monitoring?
Eventually, yes.
Do you recall when?
I don't.
And do you recall receiving in 2005 information from Father Rolfing, R-O-H-L-F-I-N-G, who reported almost identical circumstances concerning Waymire and young people like those at Barnes & Noble when Waymire was in seminary?
Do you know, I don't recall it. It seems to me at some point I became aware of that, but I don't recall when Father, what's his first name? Father Rolfing, when Father Corey Rolfing would have spoken. Is that documented in the record?
Yes, he
Okay.
brought that to you, didn't he?
Okay. I don't know that, but it would be recorded if it were so.
In 2006, you became aware that, did you not, that Waymire was now a parochial administrator? in parish.
I'm
and
sure I
ministry.
did, yes.
And the restrictions imposed on him, both by monitoring and otherwise, were not known to the public, correct?
I believe that's true. I don't recall that specifically.
And you recall receiving from Ramsey County Deputy Sheriff Layden, Leyden, that he saw Waymeyer hanging around the parking lot, cruising for sex.
I would agree with everything you said except for the last part. As I recall, he's a deputy, is that right? I believe it's a
Yes.
deputy. The deputy said he's hanging around in a place that's known to be a pickup zone. And he said, while I did not see him get out of his vehicle or speak to anyone, I was concerned that he was either going to do that and get himself in trouble, or he was going to get beat up.
He expressed to you, did he not, that Waymeyer was exhibiting behaviors consistent with sexual addiction?
I don't recall that particularly.
Do you recall describing Waymeyer as playing on the edge and describing him as being out of control?
I don't recall that, but I know that's what I thought of him.
Do you recall meeting with Tim Rourke as monitor the next day, describing some of these problems?
I do not recall that meeting. I'm pleased that I did it, though.
Did you have concerns at that time about publicity in Waymeyer and what he had been doing, and that there might be bad publicity because of it?
I don't believe that was my concern, no.
Do you agree that if Waymeyer was restricted as to his activities with youth, that there was enough of a concern that he posed a risk of children?
No. He's an adult gay man whose concerns were hanging around the edge of places where adult men pick each other up.
Well, why have a restriction on him as to kids if he doesn't pose a risk of danger to kids?
I don't recall that. I don't recall the restriction.
Well, then assume that the records reflect that he was restricted as to youth. And that was at some point considered to be removed or was removed. Doesn't that change what either should have been done at that point in time? And isn't that something you should have known?
I'm having a hard time unraveling the various moves there. Help me just a little bit.
While he was on monitoring, he had a restriction that said he was to have no contact with youth. That's reflected in the records, and it's being discussed with the principal at St. Joseph's. And that's being considered being lifted. You're seeing, at this point in time, Waymeyer as a pure homosexual adult problem, right?
That's correct.
Well, if there's a restriction on youth, somebody put that on him, right?
If that's true, that must be so.
You should have known that, right?
And there's a chance that I did. I don't recall it at this point.
In 2009, he's what else do you learn about Waymeyer then after the Ramsey County Sheriff while he's on monitoring?
I would receive reports from Tim Rourke from time to time about all the people he was visiting. And my understanding from Tim, which would have been my essentially only interaction with this matter, was that Waymeyer was cooperative with the monitoring program.
In April of 2009, Hesselberger is now the chancellor, and there's discussions about making Waymeyer a pastor versus an administrator. You're involved with that, aren't you?
No,
You had no knowledge of that?
that's correct.
When you're discussing the new information that had been emerging about Waymeyer and the monitoring with O'Rourke, who was his monitor, had you gone back to the file to see what was actually known by the Archdiocese, or given the file to Rourke to know so he could really see what danger was posed.
So,
Back to the form.
yeah, the first, you asked two questions, and I think the first one was, did I ever go back to the file? I don't recall doing so.
And did you ever make the file available to Rourke as the head of the monitoring program, knowing that he was his monitor?
I believe so, yes.
How did you do that, and when did you do that?
I believe that he had carte blanche access to the files and was allowed to read them as he chose, part of his orientation process. And I don't recall if Curtis Waymeyer was already on monitoring in any formal way before we brought Tim Rourke on. But part of Tim Rourke's orientation process was to read the files. At least I urged that he would do so.
In 2011, there was some discussion excuse me, in 2009, in the summer and fall of 2009, Bishop Sirba gets some information about Waymeyer and children. Do you become aware of that?
No.
Bishop Waymeyer, Father, I guess it's then Bishop Sirba, now Bishop Sirba, makes a call to the mom of this child and discusses perceptions of scandal. Are you aware that a call had been made to the mom of the child who had been abused?
No, I think this is the first time I'm hearing it right now.
In September of 2009, Waymeyer is arrested for DUI. Did that come to your awareness?
I believe not.
And in the police report, it's reflected that he is asking teens if they want to go back to his campsite and party. Is that behavior suspicious of a danger here?
What a sick person. I don't think I've ever heard that.
He called the now Chancellor, Joe Keppers, to represent him, and Keppers is reflected as being the lawyer for him. Did you ever receive information about the September 2009 arrest and the circumstances surrounding it?
To today, I believe I have not.
In a document, there is a suggestion, and I can't say that it's clear, that Father Pichet suggested the Archdiocese call you because you are the handler. Do you recall ever receiving a call from anybody about the information emerging about Waymeyer in 2009?
I'm sorry, I don't.
You're still in charge of the monitoring program, and he's still in it, right?
That's correct.
In 2011, in a memo to Rourke, you raised concerns about whether there should be a disclosure of Waymeyer's history to the parish, don't you? And make a decision not to disclose.
Well, so I believe there's a 2011 memo. I'm taking your word on that. My recollection is that, and this was part of the NPR, I think I first saw this back at me in front of NPR, so it has certain searing quality in my memory, that some archdiocesan leader, probably the Archbishop or someone acting for him, was saying, ought there to be further disclosure about this fellow? Someone, I don't know whom, directed that question to Tim Rourke. Tim Rourke came to me, asked my opinion. Now, as I recall the memo, what I did was I reflected what was clearly by then outdated information, and my conclusion based on that outdated information, as I famously told Minnesota Public Radio. And did, as I recall, fortunately at the end of the memo, say that I was copying it to the then Vicar General, because I always think it's possible there'd be new information of which I wouldn't be aware.
Well, you in fact recommended against any disclosure in the workplace. Did you not?
I think that's correct, yes. Since I figured he was an adult, interested, gay man, I did not believe that any such disclosure was either necessary, useful on the one hand, nor likely to be anything but prejudicial to him on the other.
Don't you think it's a problem? You're in charge of the monitoring and you're not getting the information and hearing about a lot of this for the first time today?
Yes.
You knew he was a sex addict, didn't you?
No.
You
Did
knew that
St.
St.
Luke's characterize him as a sex addict?
A diagnosis of sexual disorder.
That's, of course, not sex addiction.
It's
Right.
referred to in documents as sex addiction.
By St. Luke's? I mean, I don't recall that Mr. Eisensimmer, I'm calling you.
Okay.
Mr. Anderson, you both begin with vowels. I don't recall that, Mr. Anderson.
Right.
I think that's the first time I've mixed you up with Andy Eisensimmer.
I've got 12:30. I suppose this would be a good time for a lunch break. Should we do that?
I'm in favor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's do that.